One of our problems is that we've been so enamored with like innate talent and performance that we have so lost sight of that effort and practice is what leads to success, not just innate talent.
Welcome to Mind and Heart. We continue our discussion with Dr. Karen Villa, and we're talking about resilience and the connection that is with the cardinal virtue of fortitude. And what we would like to continue in our discussion here is to really unpack all the studies that we see, more of an in-depth understanding that's flown out of the decade of the mind, and understanding this resilience. And really, to begin our conversation, we've talked about mindsight. Maybe you could define that and then tell us how that kind of affects resilience. Yeah.
So when we arrived at the decade of the brain, we realized how remiss we were that we did not have a definition for the mind. So we were looking so much at structure and function and chemistry that we didn't make provision for. There's this higher order idea of the mind. And the mind is all the integrated parts working together to balance emotion and thinking. So mindsight is this idea that emerged out of that the mind is what regulates information and energy flow with the environment. And mindsight, ultimately is I can see the mind of another person and have an empathic understanding of that. And we'll talk about that, down the road. But at this stage, resilience, mindsight is teaching children that they can save a piece of their own mind to regulate, monitor, and modify their own mind.
Wow.
So they can use their mind to regulate their mind. And this is how you want to teach calm and this sense of security and, sitting at a distance and looking in on your own mind and seeing what you think about the environment, being responsive rather than reactive with it. So this compassionate communication that parents, through the Virtue program, has a lot to do with building mindsight as a tool to engage with the world and deal with adversity.
So that would be another way of saying, I got to think about it. Or take it right.
It would be.
I got to take a step back.
A whole new nuanced science.
Yeah, that's
right.
So just pausing and kind of that's which is so important to do. I mean, which let's see. I'm sure we'll talk about that when we talk about prudence.
Yes.
But that's really so. All right. So then we'll keep going.
Well, there's this idea of neuroplasticity. Really, before the decade of the brain, we thought that the brain was like this fixed entity. It was what it was. But what we discovered when we used all these ways of looking in on the brain is that it has a capacity to grow itself. And that's the part where neurons that fire together wire together. So these repeated ordinary experiences that you are giving children in everyday life is really what's wiring their brain for health. So, this is something you can even teach your children, is this idea of neuroplasticity, that the mind is really like a muscle. And when you use it in certain ways, that's what the pathway that you're laying down. So, kids can either lay down this strong pathway towards anxiety, or they can lay down this strong pathway towards a yes brain, and being able to stay in touch with thinking and problem solving, regulating emotion. They're just different neuronal pathways, and these repeated experiences determine those pathways.
So when you're saying that, to me is so fascinating because, oftentimes that, we can say, well, I just can't do something. And what I'm hearing you say is, or even if you're studying, it's something about studying something that's difficult. I can think about myself studying the first time I picked up a reading of Pope Benedict, and Joseph Cardinal Ratzinger, And I read it and I thought, and I was in, graduate courses, I'm thinking, I'm never going to be able to understand what he's saying. But I can remember just, struggling and keeping at it and keeping at it, and then eventually now I can pick up those same books and read it with ease.
And that is the very nature of it. You know, one of our other scientists, researchers, Angela Duckworth, wrote this book on grit.
Yeah.
And moving through the world with grit, like determination and strength. And she gives example after example of stories of people who just practiced their way through things.
Yeah.
So it really was about skill building and this idea that the place I start is not the place that I'm going to finish. One of our problems is that we've been so enamored with like innate talent and performance that we have so lost sight of that effort and practice is what leads to success, not just innate talent.
Right. I think that is such an important point, because oftentimes, you know, we can limit ourselves, or even as in parenting, or even as teachers, you know, think, okay, well, this is your talent, and your talent doesn't go beyond this. Well, you may not be great at it, you know. I mean, like, I think one time we were talking, and you were talking about your daughter and jump roping. Yes. Maybe this is probably a good way to share, or unless you want to share that, you highlighting that as another example. But
that's the idea of push-in versus cushion.
Right.
That
Okay.
Dan Siegel talks about that. As a parent, if you're in relationship with your child, you have kind of a sense of whether you need to push them or whether you need to cushion them and soothe them. And, you know, we all have lots of examples from parenting, but one that comes to mind with my daughter is very early on, she was a gifted reader. So she spent a lot of time with books. I could tell that her left hemisphere was growing into like this muscle, which, you know, it's so fun to watch your children unfold. But I knew her right hemisphere, right, her visual spatial processing was not getting as much play. And, you know, we kind of navigated that for a while with, you know, certain difficulties. But I have this memory of her finishing up second grade. And her beloved gym teacher came to me one day and said, you know what I did for your daughter with the jump roping, because she's just having such a hard time? I decided to just lay the rope on the floor and have her jump back and forth over it. And she was so happy that she had found this accommodation for my daughter, but I was somewhat appalled. Like, wow, her right hemisphere is really falling behind. So I always did kind of a summer bridge work with my kids. They always had kind of a program in the morning, and then in the afternoon they just had free time to, you know, roam about and do what they wanted. But I was determined that summer to make it part of her program that she would practice jump roping and she would practice riding a bike, because that's the other thing she wasn't learning. So for 15 minutes every morning, she practiced jump roping. I enrolled her in a jump roping summer camp and got a call that she was having a really hard time. And I really soothed her through that. So I pushed her into it, and then I worked with her when she was upset about not getting it right. So she practiced, and by the end of the summer, she was doing both proficiently, jumping rope and riding a bike.
Right, and so I think what's so wonderful about that example is that, you know, you could look at it and say, you could approach it and say, she's never going to be able to do it.
Right,
okay.
So we'll just avoid it.
Right. Mm-hmm. And so she may never, you know, but I mean, everyone needs to know how to ride a bike, you know. And but she had both of those skills that she can have. She may not be expert, and it may not be her talent, or she may never be able to be in a jump rope contest.
Right.
But you saw that she needed to develop that part of her brain to help her have a more of a healthy, more integrated brain.
And a more balanced brain.
Right. And I think that's, you know, I mean, not that it needs to be every part of everyone's life, but we need to look at it from that perspective. And parents, and sometimes we can limit them. And I've seen this happen somewhat even in education. You know, there is that. You know, not let's not challenge them more. Let's not they can't write in cursive. They're never going to be able to write in cursive, so they shouldn't. Well, no, because when you write in cursive, actually, you're using a completely different part of your brain.
Right, and it is a more integrated kind of writing. So we can really, as parents, want our children to avoid struggle, and do them such a disservice by avoiding struggle rather than helping them to lean in and have practice and have successes. And the success with my daughter is that she's a pilot now. She has her pilot's license, which I would have never imagined for her in second grade, given that her visual spatial skills weren't as well developed.
Yeah, so you looked at it from another perspective, but hopefully, someone who may be listening to this say, oh, maybe I need to, focus. I encourage you, really to look at that and don't just. There may be a certain talent, which is great, but let's find other ways so that they can be more integrated and more whole. All right, that may have been a little bit of diversion, but it still highlights.
To the point of resilience,
exactly.
right? That was not an easy thing for her, and it caused her, a lot of tears and frustration, but she, weathered her way through it, and she felt really good about what she had accomplished in the end. We think that our children's self-esteem comes from, how much we love them and how much we shower them with praise, when really it comes from this kind of resilience where you can practice and, weather failure and see that you can be successful. A child feels really good about that on the other end. And I would say the foundation of their self-esteem comes from that very thing.
Yeah, and even when you said that reminds me of a quote or a study, or I don't know, when we're talking about the joy, and that joy comes from, the satisfaction of persevering and doing something well, and that's when we talk about this resilience, and that happens. It's perseverance. It's being industrious. It's just completing that assignment all the way. All the way to the end. Seeing it across
the finish line, right. So getting back to interpersonal neurobiology, one point in resilience that Dr. Siegel and Dr. Bryson emphasize is that you see behavior as an opportunity to build skills, and not as something you need to extinguish or control or avoid and accommodate. So that's the idea of mindful parenting with this goal of building resilience, is that you enter into a difficulty with the idea that you're going to help your child build skills for handling that difficulty. And he gives the example in his book, for instance, of a little boy who punches somebody when he's angry. And you could come in and say, you can't do that. I'm going to punish you for that. You need to just stop it and knock it off. Or you can enter it into, first with the balance, connection, right? I see that you're angry, and let's you and I think of some better ways that you can handle your anger.
Right.
And it's a completely different pathway for parenting. One is mindful and wise, and one is just reactionary that has the goal of just surface level appearance of good behavior, but you're not getting into that substance of teaching them that they can navigate the world with skill.
Right, and I think that's what when we talked about the 4 S's, just that the soothing them or being secure, that they're feeling safe, that even though they may have acted out in that way,
right, you still love them,
right, and there's still a conversation that needs to happen, and that's really when I focus on working with teachers or schools, and I want to encourage, we talk about this language of virtue,
right,
that you want them, there's words to describe the behaviors and the habits that we want them to form, and that you don't really, I could either approach a situation by saying to that little boy that may have hit somebody, you're the meanest kid that ever walked these halls, or I can say, what's going on here, and let's find ways that you can, be more respectful or more kind, or what's behind that action.
Right, what's behind it, what skills do we want to foster, and then having faith that child is going to feel good about themselves.
Right.
And that will be the fruit of having mastered whatever their struggle is. So we have another individual who wrote a book a couple of years ago, 2018. It was one of the best books of the year.
Oh, wow.
It was called The Coddling of the American Mind. And he gets into kind of this resilience that we have lost sight of, and that because we are overprotective parents, because of this age of the internet that kids are being raised in, that we've promoted this idea of safetyism. That the most important thing is that our children feel safe all the time and that they never experience any kind of discomfort. And really what we're finding is that this is undermining their social, emotional, and academic development and growth. So we have to be very thoughtful about not, as he says, prepare the child for the road, not the road for the child.
Right.
So much as parents, we want to clear the road for them and make sure that they feel comfortable. But then when they need to go out and deal with the adversity of everyday life, they just feel ill-equipped.
Right. And as you're talking, I'm kind of watching the scenes from To Kill a Mockingbird, where they're out, they're out playing all,
So
all wee hours of the night, and they're
Right.
all the different situations they run into. Or, I mean, I could even think, when I was growing up, it's like, you just didn't come inside till they told you it was time to come inside. You just
Right.
stayed outside till it was dark, and then you come in, and
that's nature. When any living thing is exposed to the elements, they're going to strengthen, and they're going to have more of a stamina for dealing with the world. As God designed it, there are systems that don't work well if you don't use them. The immune system is one of them.
Right.
Our bones weaken if we don't use them, and children are the same way. They weaken if they aren't out, facing the elements of daily life and feeling like they can handle them. So if we treat children like they should be afraid of the world, and safety is the main goal, they are developing this exaggerated fear response.
Right.
So that's why we're seeing these high levels of anxiety, which Dr. Siegel would think about as being in the chaotic zone.
Yeah, right. Wow. So anything else on that? I know there's another part of resilience that we would probably want to have a little bit more discussion on, which, boredom. But
Right.
is there anything on this with the mindsight, any other points that you'd like to touch on before we would continue on to that discussion?
Well, that, parents feel like they can tell their children about how their own brains are growing, that they, foster this idea of neuroplasticity, that they have the expectation that children learn to handle these difficult situations with calm and a sense of agency, like I can handle this situation.
Right.
I think that that's really important to emphasize.
Okay, good. Thank you. All right, well, thank you, and we'll continue on with the next part of this, which I know we both look forward to discussing.
Okay, very good, sister.